Today I'm going to attempt to remove the rust using a simple and cheapest method possible from tools or anything else that you can fit into a container. Welcome back to Survival Existence. As you can see, these tools are very rusted. This chisel full of rust I got from actually the underside of my grandson's car. Somebody that evidently somewhere down the line, looks like they purchased a new chisel. As you can see, the edge hadn't even been hardly used at all. I'm going to try to recover this chisel and this pair of pliers to get the rust completely off of. This pair of pliers is so rusty that, as you can see, I can't even open them. They won't open at all. It's all rusted together. I'm going to see if some white vinegar will in fact remove rust from these tools. In just a minute I'll be right back with you. Tools, I tend to like to have a little bit of a coating on them because it does lend a little bit of rust resistance to them if there is, or the coating, I would actually, the way it looks whenever they're finished, I would really distinguish it as being more of a patina. But nonetheless, it is a coating of something that helps tools, steel tools, to resist rust. As a consequence, I like using this particular method for removing rust on tools. If it was something that I was going to paint, that the finish on it would really make a great deal of difference, then I would use another method like evapor rust, or perhaps even electrolysis to remove the rust and clean up the surface as much as possible before I prepped it for painting. But tools are a different matter to me. And as a consequence, I want these to have some sort of coating on them, in addition to the oil that I'll put on them, and keeping them wiped down to keep them from rusting again. I have no idea where this pair of pliers come from. It still has the coating on the handles and it's roughed up. Either of these have been exposed to some sort of caustic vapors, or that's rust up and under them. Time will tell. Worst comes to worst, I'll probably remove the handle, the coating from these handles, in order to make sure and get the rust that's in under them. I'll be back in just a minute and I'll remove this coating from the handles. Just as I suspected, under these handles, the rubberized coating on them is rusted, and I'm going to need to remove these handles completely before I start the process of removing the rust from these. Now I'll get this container, a small enough container so I don't waste too much of the vinegar, but a container nonetheless large enough to contain the rusty tools. After I put those in this container, I will pour white vinegar, being sure to completely submerge the tools. And this is a process you'll probably want to do outside because the vinegar will start stinking. inside your house and smell like you're doing nothing but pickling all day, which if it doesn't bother you, that's fine. And of course, during the winter, in the cooler months, you'd be better off to go ahead and bring this inside where the temperature of the vinegar will stay a little bit warmer. It would probably work better. If you'll look real close, you can see bubbles starting to form on the rusty pieces of steel. If you'll notice, these bubbles are starting to appear along the surface of the rusty steel. That means the vinegar is starting to work. Vinegar is a mild acid, and as a consequence, it removes oxidation, which is the rust from the metal pieces and parts that you have in a vinegar bath. We're going to leave these for approximately 12 to 24 hours, or however long it takes to remove the rust from these particular items. The chisel is pretty rusty, but the pair of needle nose pliers is extremely rusty, especially under the handles. We're going to see if we can't get them back in some sort of usable shape and use them for a few more years. Okay, it's been about 22 hours since I first put this very rusty chisel and extremely rusty pair of needle nose pliers to the vinegar. If you look closely, you can see that it's still working. There's still bubbles coming up, trying to remove the rust or the oxygenation from the metal. It looks like it's going to take considerably longer to remove this, but in order to speed up the process a little bit, I'm going to use one of these Scotch-Brite type sponges with the rough pad on the back side to remove some of the excessive rust and perhaps make it operate a little bit quicker. Of course, I'm going to wet the sponge and remove some of this. As you can see, it's removing a great deal of it as I rub it off of there. Not getting everything, but it's getting quite a bit of it off of there. And as a consequence, it should work a little bit quicker, trying to remove the rust from the metal. At first, I didn't think it was doing a whole lot better than all perhaps maybe navel jelly, but nonetheless, it does seem to be doing a fairly good job of removing this rust. It's going to take a little bit more soaking time, perhaps another day or so, in order to remove as much of the rust off as possible. You can see that's pretty thick right there, and it must have been extremely thick in order for it to still be on there and everything around it coming off. It's just one of the more rusted areas. As you can see from this chisel, that chisel hasn't been used much, if any at all. It looks like it perhaps has had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 strikes on something, which hasn't been used much at all. Like I said, even the marking from where it was cast is still here. I'm going to try to clean this up as much as I reasonably can, and then I'll set it back in and let it soak some more to continue to get the rust off of it. But there is the chisel thus far, and like I said, I'm going to let it sit and soak for quite a few more hours in order to get all the pieces off. Then I'll of course come back and clean it thoroughly with soap and water, dry it very, very well, and then I'll put some oil on it. It'll be a perfectly good chisel for using again. Next, we'll look at this pair of needle nose pliers. Still can't open them at all. Now, I don't think I'll probably use this pair of pliers. It's highly unlikely. So there is a lot of rusting pitting on the handles. If I do, it'll be for very minor work. I'm afraid the handles will eventually break, but more than anything, I just want to see how these turned out with them being even worse rusted than the chisel was, and see how it turned out. Get it cleaned up a little bit here. We'll take a look at them. Afraid I'm going to break these handles if I continue to press at them. Perhaps when it gets done, if it hasn't loosened up, I'll put a little penetrating oil on it and get it loose. But for now, we'll let the tools simply set and soak. In the end, I ended up leaving these this chisel and pair of needle nose pliers in the vinegar for about 36 hours. The chisel didn't necessarily need it. The pair of pliers was a whole different ball game. As you can see, it's fairly heavily pitted. Some of that is from the molding process, but most of it is actually from rust, where it's rusty. But as you can see, they're functioning. And while I wouldn't use this on anything fine or anything electrical, still, like pulling cotter pins and clips, stuff like that, it's still a functioning pair of pliers, and you can repair them and use them. This chisel cleaned up quite well. Whenever you use vinegar, like I'd said before, it actually leaves a type of patina on the metal. And I would assume the way this is cast iron. Being as I worked in a foundry before, I can see the grinding marks and part of the molding process. Could be steel, but it's more than likely iron. Once I pulled this out, I of course rinsed both of these off with water and dried them as best I could. And perhaps I probably should have run a hairdryer on them or stuck them inside just simply a warm oven to completely dry them out. But as you can see, with it sitting next to the sink and drying off, sitting on a paper towel, I evidently splashed some water on it, and it started to rust right here again, which really isn't an issue. Just much like a gun barrel, you simply use a little oil, and all you need is just simply a 30 weight oil would be fine. 3-in-1 oil. In this case, I'm going to use rim oil because that's what I have handy, and I don't want to go out to the shop to get my oil can. But all you have to do with rust like that is put just a little bit of oil and take some steel wool, or you can use a scrub pad, and just simply rub it just a little bit. It'll remove that rust spot very well. You can see that rust is gone. It's just simply surface rust, but left alone, it'd be completely rusty again. Once you have these out of the vinegar bath and you've rinsed them well to get the vinegar off, you need to immediately oil them. And I did with these, but what a lot of people don't understand about iron and pretty much any metal is it's porous. It'll soak up whatever it's around, whether it's water, oil, or any other liquid. So you need to oil them immediately as soon as you get them dry, and you may have to oil them 2 or 3 times. All you have to simply do is, of course, I put a piece of paper down to get some of the oil, and I don't want this leather top to be covered in oil. But just simply cover every place on the metal, making sure every spot, including the edge and the head, is covered, because it will start to rust again, of course. And there's a little bit of patina, like I said, left from this type of process, which makes no difference with a tool. If it's something you're going to repaint, you'll want to use a commercial. Rust remover. But for this kind of tools and this kind of metal, for its usage, it makes absolutely no difference whatsoever. But whenever you oil any metal like that, let it set for several hours before you wipe it down, wipe it off. Because like I said, it, much like a sponge, will soak up any liquid that's around it. In this case, it's oil, and it's going to soak it in. Once you've allowed the metal to absorb as much oil as it can reasonably, I usually wait a couple of hours, but it doesn't hurt a thing to put them down even in a bucket of oil for several days. But do use a clean oil that's non-detergent. But once you've let the oil sit and absorb in, if you'll notice right there, you can see where it is absorbed. All the oil is on the surface. But once it has set and the oil is, or the metal has absorbed as much oil as possible, just take a oily rag and wipe it down. And your tool is ready to use. That's all there is to removing rust on rusty tools or any other piece of metal that you can fit down in a container where it will sit and soak for anything from a half a day, depending on the amount of rust, to several days. This has been Bobby with Survival Existence, helping you help yourself. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Have a good day.